to quickly introduce. Yeah, as Afzal mentioned, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Proficeo. So essentially, Proficeo, as part of our CSR activities, we host a session every last Tuesday of the month called Impact Tuesday. Essentially, it is to raise awareness about issues that affect all of us, whether social or environmental. Additionally, we invite guests to come and share with us what they're doing, to provide them with some visibility, as well as the ability for us to learn from what they're doing, and hopefully form partnerships. Now, this year we've been very honored that we're partnering with Sunway iLabs, with their Net Zero Labs, to actually host 4 themed sessions. So because Sunway Net Zero Labs actually has a very audacious goal of getting to net zero, they've got a target and they're very serious about reaching these goals. And after this, basically someone from Sunway will share what that's all about. But what we're doing with them essentially is to highlight the key areas that they're looking for solutions, working with entrepreneurs like all of you. And I'm glad that most of you here are actually startups, because what Brendan from Sunway iLabs is going to tell us about might be interesting to some of you, especially if you're in the impact space. Okay, so I will now hand back over to Afzal and let him take over the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Renu, for that sharing. Now I would like to invite our partner, Brandon from Sunway iLab, to share more with you guys about the Net Zero Lab initiative. Over to you, Brandon.
Thanks, Afzal. Let me quickly share a few slides I have.
Okay.
Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes, we can see.
Great. So I'll try not to take too long so we can get to the reason a lot of us are here today. But I'll quickly introduce Sunway iLabs and what we're doing with our Net Zero Lab. So Sunway iLabs is the innovation division of the Sunway Group. And for those of us who aren't aware of iLabs, we were established in 2017. And what we're aiming to do is to foster entrepreneurship and stimulate market-driven innovations. Essentially, we want to help young entrepreneurs become more competitive in today's rapidly changing environment. So Sunway iLabs is a partnership between Sunway and Sunway Uni. And we've also gotten a few notable awards from Malaysia Digital Hub, MPCA, and the Premier Digital Tech University. For those of us who are not aware about Sunway, our so-called claim to fame is that we managed to transform a wasteland to a wonderland. Sunway first started in the 1970s, I believe, where we first had an abandoned tin mine, and we have now transformed it into a smart city. Today, Sunway spans 13 different business units across 50 locations worldwide, and we have around more than 16K employees. I'll skip through that. And Sunway City is actually a core part of the Sunway iLabs platform, because Sunway City is Malaysia's most dynamic living lab. I'll skip past this as well, because this was our previous accelerator. These were the verticals we're focused on. But moving on, what we're actually focused on in the Sunway iLabs Accelerator program is our Net Zero Lab Fund. And this is to invest in sustainable cities of the future. I think all of us are essentially aware of the issues our world faces. There's a lot of funding that we still need to achieve the net zero and sustainable goals set out by the UN. But beyond that, there's a lot of opportunities for growth, for sustainable innovation in Malaysia, and indeed not just Malaysia, but Southeast Asia in general. And to do all of this, what we really need to do is we want to leverage pipeline initiatives in R&D, technology, and entrepreneurship to build a innovation pipeline that can help transform Malaysia into a more sustainable country. Not just Malaysia, but really the whole Southeast Asia region. So the Net Zero Lab is founded on 3 objectives. The first is to invest in global ventures with commercializable solutions for decarbonization and green technologies, because as the name might suggest, the Net Zero Lab is focused on helping us hit net zero. So we're talking about reducing waste, we're talking about reducing carbon emissions. Beyond this, we also want to help develop a sustainable innovation ecosystem in Malaysia and position ourselves as a market leader in the region for low carbon transformation and environmental protection solutions. Lastly, we want to bring in IP and technological solutions from world-class innovation hotbeds such as Cambridge in the UK and Japan to develop an innovation-driven entrepreneurship ecosystem to benefit Malaysian communities. So the Net Zero Lab will be focused on 4 key areas. The first is renewable and efficient energy. The second will be food security. The third will be sustainable cities. And the fourth will be on the circular economy. I'll quickly look at some climate, tech, and net zero investments just to give an idea of the scale of the problem we're looking at. So according to the UN COP27, the world is still on the brink of climate catastrophe. 5.3% is the increase in global CO2 emissions over the last year, or actually the last 2 years, but we can rest assured the number is quite depressingly going up. There was a 97 millimeter increase in global sea levels from 1993. For us to ensure there's less increase in global temperatures, we really need to reduce our emissions by 45% by 2030. And lastly, 82% of global natural disasters are caused directly by direct economic losses. This is an increase of 8% from 2019. So as you can see, lots of issues around the climate catastrophe. So that's why Sunway has created a net zero roadmap. We are looking to achieve our 2030 targets of decarbonization. And this is through a few stages, really. The first is setting up the framework for us to decarbonize, for us to manage our resources well, for us to manage our pollution. Once that's done, we're looking to accelerate the decarbonization pathway by, for example, through reducing emissions, through renewable energy, and we're engaging with stakeholders to reduce our Scope 3 emissions. The last step, and really what we really want to hit over the longer term, is to reach net zero. We target by 2050, we want to reach a net zero to limit our global warming effects, and this will be in line with the Paris Agreement goal. And it's not just us that have taken an interest in sustainable investments. Global investments in global interest in sustainable investments has also been on the rise. There have been more than 3,000 climate tech startups that have been identified. And between 2013 to the first half of 2021, over $22 billion have been invested in climate tech. Of this, $2.41 billion has been invested in environment-focused tech companies. And there has been a 210% growth in investment from 2020 to 2021. So that's in 1 year, we've more than doubled our growth in investment. All of this is very hopeful, but at the end of the day, we still need more investment capital to achieve sustainable goals. We need $5 to $7 trillion per year to achieve a set of SDGs globally. We need around $265 billion every year just to end world hunger, 1.3 trillion for health and education, and 4 to 6 trillion for renewable energy until 2030. So as you can see, we've made a lot of progress so far, but a lot of progress still has to be made. In terms of the Net Zero Lab, we are looking to source for innovations, well, really wherever we can. But right now we've established a strong pipeline, including some local Malaysian universities and foreign universities. We've got our cross-border programs with JETRO and Future Plan and Southeast Asia Open Capital Innovation. These will establish an ecosystem for overseas partnerships. We have VC funds also coming in as partners for investment, and we also have our local ecosystem for startup innovation. For the Net Zero Lab, our deal flow will be through several sources. There are our cross-border programs, so startups that are not necessarily based in Malaysia can still apply. We've got a few, we're in discussions with a few startups from Japan and the UK, for example. But there's also the direct application pathway. So startups can directly apply to our Net Zero Lab, and we will internally evaluate these startups, and we'll get back if we think there's a strong fit between the Net Zero Lab and what you're doing. But that's how you can apply. What can we actually offer you? Well, the Net Zero Lab will be a series of workshops, mentoring, and fundraising. These services are to help you grow. We'll also be looking to help establish partnerships and shared services. One of the strongest cases Sunway can make as an accelerator partner is that we really offer, as I mentioned before, we offer Malaysia's most dynamic living lab. That means that we can help you carry out pilot projects with our Sunway BUs, our Sunway business units, or external ecosystem partners. So you can really test your product, make sure there's a strong fit with the market, see if there's any flaws that need to be improved on before really going to market. Lastly, the investment decision on our end can occur before or after the pilot. So it's not necessary that you would have to, you could, how do I say, develop your product more through our Net Zero Lab, through our pilots, and from there we might decide to make the investment. Once the Net Zero Lab is really the first step, there are also opportunities for follow-on investments. For example, through our Orbit Fund, we have a lot of industry partners and really partners across the entire ecosystem, from finance and services to telco to consumer. So that's it from me. Thanks very much for listening. If all of this does sound of interest to you, and I do hope that some of you, if not most of you, will apply to join our Net Zero Lab. So if any of this was of interest, please do connect with us through the email on the screen, or you can also follow us through the QR code. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brandon, for the insightful sharing. As what Brandon said, if you guys have interesting solution that you can propose, do check the website to find more information or connect with the team, and then they will assist you with the overall process. Another thing is, I'm sorry if you guys can't see me. I'm having some issues with my camera, but I hope you can hear me clearly. And just a quick reminder to everybody, if you have question for the next panel discussion, do type in your question. During the Q&A, we will address your question, okay? So now, without further ado, I would like to invite again Renuka to share more about our next panel fireside session. Over to you, Renu.
Thank you, Axel. So basically, today's session is more of a fireside chat and not so much a panel. This is because when I had my pre-session chat with Nick, I realized that there was so much that they were doing and so much that he can share that I thought we should focus purely on what he's doing. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dato Dr. Nick Boden. He's the founder of Clean. Nick.
Hey, Renuka. Hi everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us and for agreeing to spend your afternoon with us.
Sure.
Perhaps I'll just start by letting you introduce what Clean does and why you started, and then we can take the questions after that.
Sure. I will share some slides and just run through them pretty quickly, just to give you an idea about what we're doing. So again, thanks very much to the team for inviting me. It's a real honor to talk to entrepreneurs and industry around startups and sustainability. We are a Malaysian company. I know I don't look Malaysian, but have been here for a very long time and recently became a Malaysian. So we started Clean in 2018, and our goal was to get back and recover single-use plastics like PET bottles and aluminium cans. We do this through our smart AI-driven reverse vending machines that we invented and built, and by driving behavioral change towards recycling, by providing incentives to people which positively impact on their cost of living. So this is the real problem. And Brandon touched a little bit on the worldwide issues, but unfortunately, Malaysia is now the #1 per capita source of ocean plastic. And this is the study came out about 4 or 5 months ago. We're one of the world's biggest producers of plastic, but unfortunately, because our waste management system is essentially broken, we don't have proper separation at source. Most of our plastic ends up on the landfill. A lot of them are not sanitary landfills, so it gets washed off in rain, enters our rivers, and then obviously ends up in the ocean. And we know the problem that we have. We don't have a great recycling culture here, and we don't really have great data either. So if you've been to Germany, I ran the Berlin Marathon in 2017. And when I bought bottles of water, there was a deposit of, I think it's now 30 euro cents for every bottle of water that you bought. There was this deposit. And there were these kind of grimy looking machines at the back of their 7-Elevens that you would put your empty bottle in, it would print off a piece of paper and they'd give your money back. So as a result of that, Germany's got an extremely high, almost 100% recovery rate for PET bottles and aluminium cans. And that's as a result of something called a container deposit or a container return scheme. These schemes are in about 75 countries and territories around the world. Our neighbors Singapore will start in 2025. And this is really the only proven way to get recovery rates for plastic containers to above 80%. And we did this through a digital scheme without any government legislation and without any enforcement. We've successfully proven that this is a popular thing in Malaysia and that it can actually work. So we're the world's only company that actually provides these reverse vending machines on a recycle as a service basis. And this speaks to the circular economy, which is really where my passion lies. Making things that you sell to people, typically they're redundant after a period of time and you have to buy the new version. So with the service model, I'd encourage any startups to look at service models. You build the device so that it's you've got redundancy built into it, so it never becomes redundant. And it's up to our company to continuously make sure the technology works. We use AI to recover the containers, so that's obviously machine learning, and we keep on learning more and more containers out there. And in return, we give companies very comprehensive and detailed ESG data from each machine. There's an out-of-home branding and advertising opportunities. Unfortunately, in Malaysia, a lot of corporates either have no or very little budget for sustainability, and we're still very much locked into a kind of CSR mindset and not an ESG mindset. So sometimes you've got to create a business model that taps the A&P budget. We're very lucky because we have a 100% tax incentive as of the 1st of April to the end of next year for anyone who uses our scheme, and we try and create this stress-free relationship. The machines look like this. You may have seen them around Kuala Lumpur. We have, I think, almost 50 in the Klang Valley at various locations from universities. We don't have one at Sunway yet. We have at Help. We're in most shopping centers, kind of well-known shopping centers in KL. And what happens is you walk up to the machine, you press recycle, you put your empty plastic bottle or aluminium can in. Our AI recognizes that it belongs in the machine, and you get 10 points. Once you're done, you press finish, and then you just put your phone number in. You don't have to have the app to recycle, but it'll send you a message. And then when you're ready to download the app where the magic happens, you can download it. And as long as you use the same phone number that you've been recycling with, it'll load all the points into your app. And then the clean app is where you can then swap those points for value. Things like, we work with Mereka, Big, Benz, Lotus, Settle, Touch and Go, Grab. These are all different partners that come on that you can swap your points for this type of value. If you take an empty plastic bottle to Jalan Klang Lama, you'll get half a cent. Our rewards are roughly at least 20 times that, sometimes even more. We just finished a project with PNB where we gave away a Mana Saham 10 ringgits for 40 bottles. 40 bottles is 20 cents raw value, and we gave 10 ringgit away. So we've really managed to create stickiness and interest in this project. And you get a record of your redemption as well as your own kind of footprints as well. The dashboard is the ESG side for our partners. So every single machine has a very cool dashboard. We're the only company in Malaysia that can actually tell you who's recycling, how old they are, what their gender is, where they're recycling, what they're putting in, what are popular recycling times, and then we give a carbon offset score. So each machine has that. So for example, DHL, who are our largest partner, they have 30 machines. They get a dashboard that gives them data from those 30 machines. In a year, they created 38,000 recyclers. We now almost have 50,000 recyclers on the app who regularly recycle, and we've collected almost 1 million containers. That should happen today or tomorrow. We hit our 1,000th container, and it's really exciting because we're able to really tap into this model to create circular economies for companies. So this is about 3 weeks ago. So we're almost, as I say, we've crossed 100 tons of carbon offset, almost 1 million containers, and almost 50,000 recyclers. So that's really exciting. When you're looking at ESG, a lot of people don't really understand something called the triple bottom line and really what the circular economy involves. Basically, the circular economy is can you impact the planet profitably by not reducing its resources, and that's really impacting well on people, and that speak to ESG, environment, social, and governance. And this is what they call the triple bottom line. So can you firstly take care of the planet, impact positively on people and still be profitable, and actually open up new areas of profitability? So that's what we're talking about. In order to do that, you really need to have 5 things. You need to have digital technology. It's almost impossible to get into the sustainability space or the circular economy if you're not using IoT. For us, we have many different forms of IoT in our machines. For example, we remotely monitor most of the activities, so we don't have to go and drive to each machine to see if it's full. That would create a massive carbon carbon kind of footprint for us. Impact investment. So companies need to look at and go, okay, do I spend money sending my employees to the beach once a year to clean up the beach? That's not particularly impactful. You're probably better off not doing that. There's NGOs that do that pretty well. Let's rather do something way more impactful and use that money that has an effect 365 days a year. Management commitment's really important. Unfortunately, we just really don't see real commitment here. They're still very much like it's the last thing companies want to do. The plastic bottle manufacturers are probably the worst, and they should be the ones that are taking responsibility to create circularity and looping in their business model. You need infrastructure. It's not convenient to recycle in Malaysia. If I take 100 bottles and I put it into my car and I drive to Jalan Klang Lama, the toll and the petrol is more than the value of the bottle, and the carbon from me driving there is also worth more. I may as well not recycle. It'll be more environmentally friendly not to do that. So this type of infrastructure needs to be populated throughout Malaysia, and of course government policy. And I'm very happy to say that government policy is way ahead of where the private sector is. You have the FTSE for Good Russell Index now for public listed companies, where they have to have a minimum ESG listing that started in October. That hasn't really moved the needle at all. There is the plastic roadmap that was announced in 2021 until 2030. That also companies are still not really taking it seriously until the government starts a tax for ESG for extended producer responsibility. Maybe companies will start doing something, and perhaps the container return scheme is the only way to really change it, where the consumer actually drives the change. So this is the tax that we have, which is really useful for us. This is the Malaysia Plastic Sustainability Roadmap. It used to be under CASA. That's now changed name again, but this roadmap is still in place. A lot of people don't know about it. So Sunway has a big mall. As a landlord of a huge mall, there are a lot of people selling plastic bottles in there. You are one of the unintended consequences of your model is that you're enabling the sale of plastic water. What is Sunway doing to make sure that their tenants are recovering those containers? Not just putting those 3 bins that you see in a lot of locations, that those bins are collected by the waste collectors and essentially it still ends up in the landfill. So real impactful solutions is what we're trying to help the private sector put in place. So a couple of examples I thought I'd share with you. So Petronas is a really interesting example of circularity. So Petronas Carigali would be one of their business units that sucks oil out of the South China Sea. They'll pass that to Petronas Chemicals, which will turn the oil as a byproduct into propylene terephthalate, which is PET. A lot of people don't know that plastic bottles are a byproduct of oil. They'll then hand that over to a bottling company that will blow the actual bottled water. They'll wrap it with the Metro branding and they'll sell it in the Metro store. It's the #1 selling product after petrol is bottled water for Petronas. Now, normally what will happen is you might be on your motorbike needing to fill up some petrol. You're a bit thirsty. You go into the Mizra store, you buy a bottle of water, you'd finish it, throw it into the Tong Sampa, and then it will continue its journey to a landfill. What we're saying is, let's put one of our machines. We've got 2 machines with Petronas at 2 of their petrol stations. You'll now put your bottle into the clean machine, get your points, which you can then swap to settle points and get a discount on your next purchase, whether it's petrol or another bottle of water. So it's creating this what we call looping, where you're encouraging consumers to return the container so that those containers then can be turned back into PET pellets to make another bottle. So that would be an example of circular economy. Another one, this is an example in Lotus in Penang. It's one of our top recycling locations. They've paid for a machine on a recycler as a service basis that sits right at the entrance. So you would go shopping to Lotus with your bags full of your bottles, put them into the machine, get your points, go inside, do your shopping, use the same bags to put your shopping into because plastic bags are banned, and then you swap your points for a 5 ringgit discount. We are then able to track that and to see what people are spending that voucher on, and on average it's about 6 times the value of the voucher. So you can really see that this type of business model might be pulling people across from Aeon or Giant or one of the competitors because they're doing something that's good. They're getting a discount, and of course this has a massive effect on the cost of living for a lot of folks in the B40 range who are struggling to survive at the moment just because of inflation and where the economy is. So we have multiple locations. You can get on the app. You can see where the closest machine is. If you download the Clean app, KLEAN. In terms of SDGs, we impact on good health and well-being, building a culture of sustainability, and of course, a proven environmental impact through responsible consumption. Good health and well-being, we have a project in Fiji with United Nations where Fijians can get HbA1c blood tests for diabetes. 1 in 2 Fijians born today will die of a diabetes-related condition, so it's a public healthcare crisis. Diabetes is very similar to HIV in that you don't know you have it until your leg needs to be cut off or your kidney starts to fail or your eyesight is going. So it's important to continuously check and do blood tests, and those can be really prohibitively expensive. So that's one of the examples of how we impact on tying healthcare to sustainability. We're taking back an end-of-life vehicle from DHL, which they otherwise probably would have sold off or scrapped, and we're turning that into a mobile reverse vending machine that's off the grid, solar powered, that could go around to schools and educate kids, or go into more rural areas where our machines are not available, and do regular recycling kind of days in those communities. So there's a strong social impact and educational program attached to this. Thank you very much for the opportunity. More than happy to have a chat and take questions on what we're doing. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Nick. That was very interesting, and I hope that helped a lot of the startups here also. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about.
Sure.
Three main areas really. One is on the corporates and their role in the circular economy. 2, the government, and 3, of course, the startups and consumers. So maybe I'll just start with the government, right? As you pointed out during the presentation just now, there are incentives, and perhaps you can help all of us here understand what these incentives provide, whether it's for consumer or corporate or even the startups, and how could they use it?
Okay, so from a government point of view, there's 2 areas. I suppose there's a carrot and a stick, and typically you need to have both. We've been engaging with government for the last 4 years. It's been challenging because I think, as you all know, government keeps changing, and the ministries keep changing. The DGs change, the ministers change, everyone has their own idea. But what has continued is the plastic roadmap. So we work extremely closely with giving some on the ground feedback to government. So the tax is 1st of April to the end of next year. It's 100% tax deduction for anyone who, or any company or organization that, in inverted commas, sponsors the machine. So let's say, for example, DHL spend would be 100% tax deductible, so that it encourages them to then, get involved. That would be a carrot. Most of the stuff's all carrots at this stage. We don't think there's enough of a stick. We just had a conversation last week about that. There's also the FTSE for Good, which is the Russell Index that was launched at the end of September by Bursa Malaysia. So that's where every single listed company around the world is subject to this standardized rating system called the Russell Index. It's quite a complicated system, and it's out of 5 points. So your minimum to maintain an ESG compliant listing is 2.9. And we believe less than 50 of the 900 companies in Malaysia as of today actually meet that minimum requirement. And the effect of that would be if you were delisted and you were in an environmental space, that might affect your share price. But again, kind of like it's not really hitting the pocket of the corporates, which is why we feel everyone's really slow. The plastic roadmap, and again, we've engaged with governments around, the difference between what they would call extended producer responsibility, which is what we would call an industry-based tax, whereby they would tax companies and corporates who are obviously bottle manufacturers would be an obvious one. Someone who's making mineral water and is a listed company, what are they doing to get back their containers? That would be an extended producer responsibility tax. It's a good and a bad thing because it forces industry to take responsibility and not just sell in that linear model of, I just want to make money from the margin from selling a bottle of water. I really don't care that my bottle of water is washing up on the beach in Terengganu or in Klang, or blocking drains and contributing to flooding in the city. I don't care, because they're not encouraged or incentivized to recover those containers. So what are they doing to get back? It doesn't have to be their container, but it should be a one-for-one kind of, if I sell one bottle, I'm getting one back. That's not happening. So we feel that the unintended consequence of an extended producer responsibility tax is that all those companies are going to do is pass that on to the consumer, and you're going to create inflation. So we're much more a fan of forward-facing or consumer-facing incentives that are not taxes, but where the consumer is encouraged to change their behavior. And we've successfully shown that this type of container scheme that we've done, which is digital, is very popular. So container deposit scheme would be the fastest, most successful way to change this behavior, whereby every bottle that is sold, there's 10-cent deposit. There's probably 15 billion plastic bottles sold a year in Malaysia. So you immediately have a 1.5 billion ringgit fund. That fund then funds the infrastructure, funds the reward system, so it gives back the deposits. You're not going to get 100% recycling in the first year. It's going to take you at least 5 years to probably get to 80%. So there's always some money left in the kitty, and whatever's left over each year can then be used to, for other green projects like green roads or solar panels in schools or educational programs, or, with Sunway University, provide, for example, bursaries for real green, green trained, green technology, green R&D type of people coming out of government and private universities. So a green university, for example, that's just concentrated on future technologies. So there's lots you can do with that type of scheme, but that's pretty much all that there is right now. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with the plastic roadmap, because like we told the ministry last week, we just don't think there's enough around what the consequences are of not doing this. And that needs to be some form of punitive measure that really hits the pocket. And then corporates will be a lot more serious about this.
Thank you. Apart from clean, there's a lot of recycling centers and recycling boxes and things like that. What happens to a lot of these PET bottles? And do you find that there's different grades of PET bottles, and how do you actually deal with that?
So yeah, I also saw a question around what if someone puts something that's into the machine that shouldn't belong there. So yeah, so the AI, so we have a conveyor belt system, so it'll reverse it out and eject it. So that's how we deal with that. So if someone puts a shoe, we've had someone put a shoe in our machine. not very often, but it's happened. It rejects it, it doesn't accept it. If there's some liquid in there, we accept. You know, we can't be greenwashing and not accept the bottle because there's some water in it. But essentially, when you look at why are we recycling? So let's put the environment away for a second. So we have one of the largest, if not the biggest, plastic manufacturing industry in the world in Malaysia. It's massive, and they are desperate for what you would call clean feedstock. So meaning to say that nylon rope, shirts, you know, polyester that comes from plastic, but they can't get enough clean bottles because people are throwing it into the rubbish bin. It's mixing with organic waste. There's no separation at source. It ends up going to the landfill. So stuff coming from the landfill is contaminated. So because we're collecting very close to consumption point, our containers are squeaky clean. In fact, we've just launching this month 17 machines that get back your food containers. So you know those tapao boxes that you get your nasi lemak in, your grab food type of orders. Our AI can recognize them, and we've just finished a pilot in a condo in Kuchai Lama. Not a single container had any food in it. It was clean. So we can show the behavioral changes there. So when we collect those back, the recycling companies, we don't recycle. They will come and collect, you know, once every 2 weeks. So we'll bag and store, because of course there's a limit to how many containers we can get in one kind of cycle. So we'll store it, and then they'll come once every 2 weeks so that there's volume for them. They don't pay us, so we don't sell the containers to them. That's not our model. And we don't pay them. So we're tapping into that gig economy essentially. And they love our containers because they're clean. And that's really why you need to separate at source, is that you don't allow organic and non-organic waste at home to mix. In fact, in Malaysia, you can't actually use recycled PET in a food grade plastic container because that process is not halal certified. A lot of people don't know that. But every single plastic bottle in Malaysia is made from virgin PET, which is crazy, because if you think of the amount of plastic floating around, we should be using that as feedstock to make more containers. But you can completely understand, because a lot of those containers might be, you know, they might be contaminated with stuff. And that process of showing that recycling a container, even if it was contaminated into new PET, that needs to be halal certified. That hasn't happened yet. And if you read the plastic roadmap, you'll see that, I think that's under number 5, they talk about halal certification of recycled food grade plastic. So there's a lot of stuff to be done in that area too. But yeah, that's what happens to it. It gets turned back into PET.
Apart from reverse recycling and bins and things like that, right? I think as consumers, perhaps we don't truly understand the cycle in which, you know, our recyclables and where they go. So we have in Malaysia waste collection, and you have specific days for recycling. Would you happen to know basically what happens in that process? Because the expectation, of course, is that, you know, it is being separated and it does go back. And then you also see all of these guys in motorbikes that come around early in the morning and rummage through stuff to collect.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So I think consumers want to recycle, but perhaps they don't have sufficient amount of understanding in terms of once they've put it outside, what exactly happens.
What happens to it? Well, I can tell you what happens to it. If without mentioning any names, if the waste collection concessionaires pick it up, it goes to landfill. So I live in an area where there's a twice weekly recycling collection, and if you look at the side of the truck, it's like kertas, bottle, I don't know what else there is on the side, but actually it's just one tong sampah, and everything is mixed together. And the thing is that if you don't have a proper collection system that the consumer in their house puts it into something, you know, there needs to be a standardized, environmentally friendly bag. You know, that doesn't even exist. So you'll see in my street in Medan Damansara, like obviously people go to great lengths to go and put plastic in a plastic bag that's not see-through, and then someone goes and puts a nasi lemak packet on top of those bottles. It's contaminated. You can't use them. So it adds massive amount of cost to the plastic recycler, because they've got to go go through another, separation, and now it's food mixed up in minya and oil and all that. So for those informal collectors that are informally collecting, they're passing that across to the kind of over-the-counter guys in Jalan Klang Lama, for example. There's a lot of those type of places, or in Sunway Bulo, and that's more the informal collecting community that get paid on real value per ton. We're not interfering with that because we're really dealing with consumers who want to do something. So we don't interfere with that. And there's more than enough plastic to go around, that's for sure. But when we work with our recycling partners, they're licensed. We're very aware of our carbon footprint as well. So it's not like we're not creating carbon. Our machines are made of sheet metal. So we're trying to transition even how our machines are made to recycled plastic sheeting, so that we can also reduce our footprint as well. But I think with startups that might be listening, I think there's a great area around reverse logistics. So if you think about it, like those Grab or those food delivery riders, they come to your house and they deliver something, but they go back empty-handed. You're missing out on a journey. Those guys. So my dream has been to be able to help those Grab or food delivery guys. A lot of them don't have any insurance. So if they get hit in an accident, which you see all the time now because they go to red traffic lights, unintended consequence of food delivery is that these guys need to hit a certain number of deliveries, and they're driving like maniacs up the wrong way through the traffic lights. And it's sad because they probably have to hit a certain number of deliveries before they make money. But if they get knocked over, they'll normally have a head injury, and that's it. They could be paralyzed or brain damaged, and they then become a burden to their family, and their family loses out on that 3,500, 4,000 ringgit they might be earning a month. So imagine a situation where you could pass your containers to the delivery guy. He has a special account linked to his phone number. He goes to our machine. He goes and recycles your containers. And in return, if he hits a certain amount, he gets micro healthcare insurance. It might cover him for private hospital up to, I don't know, 10, 20,000 ringgit. But there's another opportunity to look at reverse logistics. So I think there's great opportunities in reverse logistics, which we should be tapping into.
I love that idea of the Grab driver dropping something off and picking something back.
Yeah.
And then recycling for his own benefit. So moving on, or sort of a segue into the corporate sector. Now, you touched on something just now, which is a particular pet peeve of mine as well, which is CSR activities, which are either mistaken or pretending to be ESG. And I guess a lot of it comes from the fact that the expectation perhaps is that corporates do good by doing activities, and they try to kind of hit more than one thing at one time by getting their staff involved, where they go and paint orphanages and old folks' homes and, to spend a day and things like that. And all of that is great. But it's not really doing anything to get us to net zero, so to speak, right? Could you share a little, some examples? You mentioned, I think you did a great job of explaining the Petronas circular economy cycle and how that works. But I do believe also that you're doing a lot more with DHL and how in what they are doing to actually achieve their net zero. Perhaps you can, just share a little bit about what and how you're helping them get there.
Sure, great question. So I think it all really boils down to impact. You need to be able to measure the impact of whatever you're doing. So, okay, it's impactful to paint the walls of an orphanage, and I'm not saying that's not important. That should just be a stock standard thing you do anyway. But I wouldn't consider that ESG. I would consider that a community involvement and like a real feel-good thing. In the same way that I wouldn't consider beach cleanups a particularly useful thing, if you think about it, right? So I was giving a presentation to the Majlis Perbandaraya Kuala Langat, that's kind of that not Port Dickson, but They have Morib Beach is underneath them. And I spoke to the presented clean to their whole kind of mayoral committee, and they see it, right? They see these companies coming all the way from Kuala Lumpur with a bus, once a year, coming to clean up Pantai Morib. And then by the time they leave, the plastic's all washed from the ocean back onto the beach. So everyone goes back to KL feeling really good about themselves. But what was the impact of what they did? It probably lasted half an hour. What did it cost to bring the whole, carbon cost, they probably all ate some lunch wrapped in plastic. Where did that go? They probably just put into the rubbish bin at Pantai Morib. So, when you start to look at your impact, you've really got to be very detailed about, okay, well, really guys, what are we doing here? Right? I'm not saying beach cleanups are unimportant, but, perhaps it would be better to go into the community in Pantai Morib, and educate them, or give them, a recycling machine, or I don't know, something that is going to create impact once you leave. So I always say, when you leave a place, just leave your footprints, right? I think when we leave places now, and we're trying to do something that we think is ESG, but is really just a very short impact community project. I think we need to call it out for what it is and go, hang on, corporate should be doing a lot more than turning the lights off during Earth Hour. In fact, don't even bother. Earth Hour has been shown to consume more energy than it saves. Because if you live in a climate like Kuala Lumpur, when you turn off all your lights, your air conditioning gets turned off. And your room heats up. So the minute after Earth Hour, you turn everything back on, the aircons work extra hard to cool your room down. So is it really making any difference? Probably not. Maybe change your light bulbs to LED. That would be better, so that your energy saving is over a year. So I get into a bit of trouble because I call these things out, but I think we need to do that. And I think we need to have real discussions, with our bosses, going, oh, hang on a second, are you really impacting here? There might be some other things that might be better to do. Like crowdfunding, I think, is a great example of impact, where you could crowdfund an orphanage to give them 10 books every day or meals every day for a year. That would be way more impactful. So I think it boils down to impact. Are you really impacting on the environment by doing it? Are you really impacting on the social side? Are you really impacting on governance? CSR, that's why you don't talk about that anymore. You talk about ESG, so that you can then say to the likes of DHL, okay, what has DHL got to do with plastic bottles and aluminium cans? Well, they probably transport a lot of that stuff. They might transport, the sell and purchase agreement for a bottling company around the world. So they have some form of involvement, but they definitely have a huge carbon footprint they're trying to cut down. So their sponsorship of these machines for a year allowed us to offset, I think, about 70 tons of carbon. 70 tons of carbon offsets 300,000 kilometers of delivery miles for them. So this is where you can start to draw in the dots between something we're doing in Malaysia and offsetting a company like DHL's kind of carbon footprint. And I think the first thing is being transparent. And they're like, hey guys, we have a massive carbon footprint. They're not lying about it. They're like, we really want to do something about this. So we're transferring our whole fleet in the next 10 years to EV, for example. So they're really saying, we are responsible, but we're doing something about it. What we don't see in Malaysia is we don't see corporates going, oh, hang on, I've got a massive university and a massive shopping center. What is my electricity bill? And what is my carbon footprint? So these are the discussions that corporate Malaysia need to have. They need to go, and that's what ESG reporting is about. It's like, we are, most of our electricity in Malaysia comes from coal. It's black electricity. What's the transition like towards green renewables? We need to have that kind of dashboard for every corporate to go, okay, this is where I am, and this is what I'm doing to really impact on it. So I think it does boil down to impactfulness for me.
Thank you. I think, that's a great distinction to make between community activities, which have a feel-good factor, and, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
You should do it anyway. Yeah.
Yes. But as far as ESG is concerned, it comes back down to measuring the data and being honest about what is the footprint and what can you do about it, which brings me to data. And in the scheme of ESG, I think that, For listed companies, because of FTSE for Good and what Bursa is doing, right? So they've put in place a lot of these policies and these requirements and the Russell Index and things like that. And I think there is a learning curve perhaps for the corporate sector, especially the listed companies, to actually get to a stage where they truly understand what their footprint is, and and then show how they are actually making an impact. But from a startup perspective, right, for people that are listening in today and who have joined us, there are many of them that are doing some form of recycling or in the circular economy. What is your view in terms of the type of data that is going to be relevant, that they should be collecting and providing to the corporates to help them with ESG?
Well, that's a great question and a complicated one to answer, but I think it's putting on a lens when you're looking at your startup and what it is that you really are trying to achieve, is to really start looking inwardly and going, okay, if I can't provide myself with that data as a startup, which measures my impact, then I'm not going to be able to do that for a corporate. I'm not going to be able to add value in terms of data. So I think the basic business models need to be themselves, generating data for themselves around. So for example, there's a very successful company that collects back clothes. All right, and we're working with them to help them. And they're an ally with us in diverting clothes away from landfill. But the containers that you put the clothes into, there's not a single technology in there. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, how do they know when those bins are full? And you know how it is, when those bins get full, people just dump the clothes next to the bin, all right? And that's an issue. So like, what about putting some IoT in there that links to a map, a Google map, that can even go and tell you this bin is full, don't worry about that one, you don't need to go and check it. At the moment, they check every bin. So like, when you're looking at that business model, it might be the diversion of those clothes from landfill audits, but that the infrastructure that allows them to do that, what's that carbon footprint like? And how do you constantly look at yourself and go, oh, I need to be, doesn't make sense for me to go on a fixed route when that one's never full. Maybe I need to move it somewhere else. So I think that's important. Is again, it goes down to that slide with those 5 enablers. You need technology. You have to have technology that can report back that data to you. So it needs to be like a bin fullness sensor, for example. So I think when it comes to startups, making sure that you're looking at your own ability to impact and being able to measure that impact, and that normally speaks to some form of IoT, and ensuring that from the get-go you've got that, because then when your corporate who you're going to go ask for funding says, what am I going to get out of this? Say, well, yeah, we already have this built into our business model. We already know what our carbon footprint's like, of all our staff, maybe all the team that is at the lab have some form of tracking in their car of how much they, how much carbon they spend getting to work every single day. That type of thing is important now. And I think that needs to be built into the business model. Even if you're not creating a startup solution that is in sustainability, but you're building that in, because that just gives comfort to both yourself and any corporates that you're dealing with, because they will be under more and more pressure because of the things we've spoken about to reports, and they'll want to know, are you not creating more carbon through this type of business model? Are you really reducing it? Yep, you're doing a good thing at the end of the day, but you might be creating more carbon as a result of the infrastructure you've got to put in to do this. So there's an example of that at the moment. I won't mention the company's name. It's a multinational company who we've been trying to work with. They produce tons of PET and containers, and we've been trying to get them to work with us to help us to recover back containers for them on a one-to-one basis. And they have a system where they give you these plastic buckets that you use at home to put your waste into, which they collect. And they've now spent, I think, a fair amount of money on the infrastructure and the trucks to go and collect those plastic boxes. And I'm like, no, man, I mean, that doesn't make sense. Yeah. Why don't you find a system which turns you and me into the people that go, and you're almost like the waste collector. So we're working on one of our technologies, which is a thing called a clean bag, which is a QR coded mesh bag that you will use at home, scan it into your app, that becomes Renuka's bag. Put all your non-PET plastics, your shampoo bottles, your whatever, your non-PET stuff goes into there. You then drive to the Lotus parking lot or some location where there's a converted shipping container, and you deposit that into there. Within 48 hours, our backend will confirm that you put these containers in, and we'll give you your points. So that's the type of kind of gig economy impact that you could be doing, where you don't need to go and spend any money. You rather use that money to put the infrastructure out there. So that's kind of, those are the solutions you've got to be thinking about all the time. We put petrol in once a week. So that's why our locations at petrol stations, of all our locations, they're the most popular, because whether you B40, M40, T20, everyone needs petrol. Whether you have a Ferrari or you have a motorbike, you need petrol. So you all use the same location. You don't pay for parking at a petrol station. You typically go there once or twice a week. There's a convenience store there. That is the most convenient location. While it's filling up with petrol, you just go and put your bottles in. They're all in the back of your car and your motorbike. So those are really things that you should be tapping into. It's kind of, again, a bit of a reverse logistics concept. Yeah. I think it's a really sexy, cool, funky business model is reverse logistics. And that's what Grab did, right? Grab said, hey, you've all got cars. Why go and buy more taxis? Each person is a taxi.
Yeah.
So now fill those taxis up with rubbish. That's the next step.
Yeah. Nice. So I really like that, and I think that's great advice, which is, I think a lot of startups in the impact sector, whether it is social or environmental, they're very focused on what they're doing and looking at the impact metrics in terms of social or environmental. But it's not just about their positive acts, but it's also about how they run their business. Like you were talking about logistics and, what is their own carbon footprint? What have they done about their own energy usage? And it is something that basically is not just important to the listed companies or the corporates because of their supply chain, but at the end of the day, it will actually affect their decision in terms of which vendors they use. Correct.
I mean, the e-vehicle area is really interesting because, of course, with Tesla opening up and that. But I was in Kuching last week, and I didn't know this, but they're not adopting e-vehicles. They've gone for hydrogen. So for them, they're worried that a lot of the rare earth metals that go into batteries are dug from the earth. What happens to those batteries when they've kind of finished? How do you dispose of them? Yep. And a lot of those rare earth metals come from war zones, where I'm from in Africa, right? DRC, etc. So you've always got to look at that big picture. It's better than fuel, but when you start to really look at the life, the whole life cycle of something. So you've really got to zoom out and go, okay, don't be so focused on what you're trying to start, but look at the whole big picture. And I think that's important. I think you may have touched on that. Is that really look at the overall impact that you have as a startup, and what are some of the unintended consequences of what you're doing, and always be aware of that. There's a great resource called the Ellen MacArthur Foundation for startups to go and have a look at. There's tons of great examples of circular economy. So, for example, in Europe, you don't buy jeans. There's a company that rents you a pair of jeans. For a year, so it's like jeans as a service. There's another really interesting one around headphones. So headphones always break, and they're kind of designed to last for 2 years, and then they just fall apart. You have to buy a new set. So it's like a headphone as a service, and it's modularized. So if the cord breaks or the Bluetooth goes dodgy, they send you a replacement part, so that the headphones don't have to be thrown away and replaced. So there's tons of good examples, and if anyone's looking for resources, the Ellen MacArthur, ELLEN MacArthur, I think MACARTHUR. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation does amazing work around circular economy impacts, and there's great examples for startups. I saw an amazing one. This might be an idea. Instead of people buying tools, like hardware, like drills and all that, there's like there's a tool library. So you can go and borrow a drill for 2 days, and you pay a fee to rent the drill. so that
Nice.
you don't have to go and buy that, or a hammer, or like I don't know, like all those big electric things that you see at, you know, Mr. DIY. So those
Yeah.
are some of the cool things that there are out there that people are doing elsewhere that are not being done in Malaysia, which might work quite well here. And then you're enabling, you know, a carpenter who might not be able to afford a, you know, electric hacksaw. He just goes to the library and he rents it on a service basis. Quite cool ideas.
Yeah, very nice.
I like the service model. I think there's a lot to do there in startups.
Yeah. So I'm conscious of the time as well as, you know,
Sure.
wanting to monopolize the conversation. Afzal, maybe you want to pick up some of the questions that have come in the chat.
So, I think there's one question from Ramanes. He was asking about what are the local or international standard for validated circular economy activities, and can that validation and certification be used to raise VC sustainability fund?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know. I think there's ISO standards that would probably be the closest. So, you know, where there's ISO for environmental startups. I was just with the Green Carpenter the other day. They're really interesting guys. They take used wood and make desks for MOE and a whole bunch of other stuff. Really, really great. You should look them up, the Green Carpenter. And they're busy getting ISO. I think it's
Yep, we know them well.
yeah, 10068, or I can't remember which one, but there's definitely ISO standards. But I think I'm not sure if there's like an international standard for kind of validating circular economy. It's probably a tool that could be developed. That's another idea. You know, and even where we've struggled is like, and I see a question around giving bottles back to the manufacturers, so that, you know, yeah, I think it was Kyril's question. So also really a great question. Our problem was to try and find out the sorry, Siri's going on my phone for some reason. To find out the carbon offset. That was a real challenge for us. There's no international standard, so we kind of had to come up with our own. So, you know, the logic for me was, if you're collecting back PET, which is perfectly reusable, and you're feeding that into the feedstock, all right, the amount of carbon you produce, yes, of course, there's a carbon process for recycling PET, but it's significantly lower than virgin PET. So if my memory serves me correctly, it's in the region of 80% less carbon to recycle PET back into a PET pellet than it is to make a new pellet. So that's when we talk about a carbon offset. Aluminium is even greater. Making a ton of aluminium is I think it's the most carbon heavy process of anything that you can make in the world. So I think it's 14 tons of CO2 for 1 ton of aluminium. And the thing is, aluminium, 80% of aluminium ever kind of mined and made from the ground is still in circulation. So it's a very circular, reusable product. So when you take aluminium and you melt it down to aluminium again at whatever, 2,500 degrees Celsius, that only uses about 2 tons of carbon. So your carbon offset is massive when it comes to aluminium. So that might answer that question. Manufacturers and producers typically don't have any recycling interest at all. It's not their business, and they normally either take bottles that have already been manufactured or blown, and they fill it with their containers, or they have third-party vendors that give them the containers. So recyclers are important because it's not just bottles that you make. In Europe now, 25% of any clothing needs to be made from recycled PET. So the PET price is slowly going up because there's now a shortfall of that. So that's why we work with the recyclers, because you can turn it into nylon ropes, veneers, tons of other useful things besides bottles. And of course, in Malaysia, as I touched on it, you can't use recycled PET in food grade plastic. So that's also why it's not done in that way here. But yeah, it would make sense for bottle manufacturers to actually have their own recycling facility linked to the factory, because that would significantly reduce the carbon footprint related to logistics, for example.
Yeah. I think we've kind of answered all of the questions that were.
Yeah.
But is
I
there
think-
anyone that has any other questions that you want to raise? You know, just for a discussion. I mean, it's not like we all know the answers, but we can have a chat about it.
I think
Anyone
while waiting for them to answer, to ask question, I think there's another question. Somebody wants to know how much is for 1 unit of your recycling machine.
Oh, okay. So I mean, one unit, obviously it's a small, small volume. It's 3,500 ringgit per machine per month on a recycle as a service basis. That covers everything. So the onus is on us to make sure it works. You've obviously got your wrapping that goes around the machine. We upgrade it, we make sure it works, we manage the back, we do everything. So, that's what that cost covers. And it's on a service basis. So that's for 12 months. If it's for a longer period, that price obviously comes down. I think for 24 months, it's 3,000. For 36, it's 2,005. And we always have this idea of tapping the A&P budget all the time. So companies that don't have much of a sustainability budget, this is a real A&P play for them because it shouts out, branding and, good public relations and stuff. So more often than not, the sustainability budget is zero. So that's where we have these digital advertising screens that roll on the side as well. So yeah, that's how that's the costing at this stage.
That's great sharing. There's a question here from Atfar. Yeah.
Hey.
What would be your current business challenges right now, and how do you plan to overcome them?
Sure. It's an old friend of mine for many years. Hey, Ed. So current business challenges would really be around, just getting corporates, to do the right thing, to do what's morally right, especially the bottle manufacturers. My word, so they should be doing this. It shouldn't even be a question. They should be recovering their own containers that they sell and make a lot of money from. Instead of putting adverts on electronic billboards above the federal highway that cost them, probably R1 million a year, that would pay for 20 machines and create 30,000 recyclers, right? So I think it's just that. It's the mindset in Malaysia, which is very still much stuck in CSR versus ESG. That would be our biggest challenge, Ed. We're just not seeing that needle change. And if you look at Singapore is moving so fast now because they've got massive taxes now. They actually tax you on your carbon footprint, I think, from this year or next year. So the Singaporean companies are moving very, very quickly because it's hitting them in the pocket. And that was our message to government. You now need to bring out the stick, unfortunately, because it's corporate Malaysia needs to be doing more impactful stuff.
Absolutely. While we're waiting for any other questions to come in, I mean, I have a question on
Sure.
single-use plastics and especially packaging material, right? I think that for consumers, when we first start thinking about recycling, it's the obvious, obviously. It's paper, cardboard, plastic bottles, and cans, and then you also have glass. But when I started actually having a separate bin for all of the single-use plastics and all of the packaging materials, right?
Yeah.
It actually can get into a massive amount, and you suddenly become a lot more aware about, not buying the biscuits that have, separated out, because, I'd rather go and buy it by the grams in a old Chinese shop, because I'm not getting packaging in that sense. But
sure.
What can we do more about, either from a government or a consumer perspective with those kinds of plastic?
Yeah, I mean, I think this would really speak to innovation and looking at technologies. I've seen microbes and things that kind of eat the plastic, because flexible plastic is the thing we don't really have a solution to. Your plastic bags and your packaging. I think that's really, to me, where the innovation should be, is around technologies that are cheap and affordable, that can take those plastics and turn them into something. And there is that stuff around there. So then you go back to the actual original problem we were trying to solve in Malaysia, is that you might have that technology in Malaysia, but because no one's separating at source, you can't get the feedstock.
Yep.
So we really need to look long and hard, or the government needs to look long and hard at the home separation schemes that are non-existent. And that's really where we are moving into is, yep, I mean, some single-use plastics you can't ban. I mean, we had this discussion with the minister a couple of governments ago where she just wanted to ban all SUPs and like, I'm from a healthcare industry. How do you ban a drip? I mean, drip bags are single-use plastics. So are, you know, injections, catheters, you know, so what do you do with that type of stuff? And that's maybe where you would do kind of waste to energy plants that would burn that. Yes, there's a carbon footprint, but at least you've got some feedstock to build that back into some form of energy. So there's, again, circularity. But it goes back to that point. How do you get those plastic bags back? Because even if you separate that, Renuka, and you put it outside on your doorstep, that's still going to the landfill.
I know.
That's a sad fact. Where do you, once you've separated it in your bin at home, where do you put those flexible plastics? So what we were thinking with our clean bag concept is that you could actually put them in. You won't get points for them, but you could put your, you know, your bubble wraps and all that stuff in there. But then looking at new generations of packaging, I mean, that's really where the innovation is lacking, you know, and not biodegradable stuff. That's all nonsense. There's no such thing as biodegradable. They've tested all those bags. They're still, you bury them in that biodegradable straw, you bury it in the beach, you know, a year later, it's still there. So it's only biodegradable in a laboratory at 30 degrees Celsius. Yeah, sorry, but I mean, this is being proven in the UK.
that we don't know about.
You know, they've had these biodegradable plastic bags in the UK for the last 10 years. They're still floating around the sea because it's freezing cold. Things only biodegrade at a certain temperature. So yes, it's biodegradable in a perfect laboratory setting, but if that you know, there's this resort in Batu Batu. The folks from Batu Batu did an experiment where they took the you know, biodegradable straws, they buried it, and a year later they went and unburied them, and they were pretty much still there. So because it's buried, right?
Yep.
Waste doesn't sit floating on the surface. Sometimes it sinks, or it goes under the sand, or it's in the shade. You don't have the direct sunlight to create the chemistry to break itself down. That's the problem. Yeah. So in fact, a plastic bottle is better than a biodegradable bottle because you can't recycle biodegradable bottles.
Yeah, so I mean, there are folks who use these single-use plastics and make them into other stuff, you know. And I saw a really interesting video which was on the World Economic Forum LinkedIn sort of feed, where in India they collected all of these single-use plastics and packaging, and they actually reused them and made them into desks for schools.
We work with that company. It's called EcoSheets.
It's a wonderful video which, you know, actually showed not just what they were using it for, but also how it completely changed the behavior because it was going towards something useful.
Exactly. Kian from Heng Hiap in Johor does amazing stuff. He makes furniture, and I'm sure you're familiar with him. He does incredible ocean plastic to furniture stuff and in large volumes. So he's doing amazing stuff. The Green Carpenter was there on Thursday, and he was just testing, you know, Tetra Pak.
Yes.
So he's just made corrugated roofing using Tetra Pak, and he was testing it at his factory. That was pretty amazing as well. So yeah, that type of stuff I think is useful. But then you need the construction industry to come on board and say, we are now going to start to use this to make, you know, to put into our homes. Or I was at Unimas in Kuching last week Tuesday, and they've developed the fly ash technology to make bricks. And there's a construction company that's making their residences for the university using fly ash bricks. So that's really scalable, right? So they're really doing it. So there needs to be that okay, we've got the technology, we've made it, now use it. So that's again the next challenge. So yeah, I think there is a lot of stuff happening. I'd love to see more of that in Malaysia, more of that type of technology. We're doing some cool stuff with coffee. I think I mentioned to you off camera where we're collecting back used coffee grinds, dehydrating it and making a new polymer and making new cups. So there's tons of cool things you can do with that.
Nice. And I'm sure you've also inspired everyone else in the room here as well. So guys,
Sure.
last chance, any questions or anything you want to discuss or any pet peeves of yours that you have? No? Okay. If there's none, then I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Nick for
Thank you
your
very much,
time
Renuka. Thank you to the
and
team
for
as well.
sharing so many things with us. I think, I've learned a lot from you in the 2 conversations we've had. Today, I'm going to go away a little dejected about the biodegradable stuff, but that's awareness as well.
Yeah.
And for everyone else here, if you want to get in touch with Dato Nick, you can reach out to him on LinkedIn. Maybe Dato, you want to put your LinkedIn.
I'm going to put my email address. It's probably easier.
That would be probably easier.
There you go. It's in the chat. Thank you so much.
And also, of course, thank you to Sunway.
Thanks,
for
Sunway.
leading the way. I'm very inspired by people like Sunway and DHL and Petronas, because as really large conglomerates, they provide the example of what people can do, and at least they're trying. So every step actually makes a big difference. And yes, let's hope we see clean in Sunway Properties soon.
Cool. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for staying in the end. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.